instead to the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill 2019. I call on Deputy Jim O'Callaghan to move for leave to introduce.
Yeah, Ken Corla, I seek leave to introduce a new piece of legislation entitled the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill 2019. The purpose of the legislation is to amend the Domestic Violence Act 2018 by introducing within it a new section that would provide for the establishment and conduct of what's referred to as domestic homicide reviews. That's the purpose of the bill, Ceann Comhairle. The origins of the bill derive from the tragic murder of Clodagh Hall and her three sons, Liam, Niall and Ryan, in August 2016, and the very powerful interview that was given by Clodagh's sister, Jacqueline Call, and her mother, Mary Call, to the RTÉ broadcaster Claire Byrne on the 25th of February of this year. What usually happens, Ceann Comhairle, in situations where there has been a domestic homicide and the family have been killed and the person responsible then proceeds to kill themselves, is that there is no thorough criminal investigation. The reason why there is no thorough criminal investigation is because the suspected offender is dead and consequently there is not going to be any criminal prosecution. The Gardaí fulfil the functions that they are required to do in situations like that, which is to assemble statements from the individuals who had the tragic experience of coming upon the crime scene. They record their statements purely for the purpose of the inquest which takes place before the coroner. As you are aware, a coroner has a very limited role when it comes to determining what happened. He identifies or she identifies how the person died, where they died and when they died. Aside from that, no answers are given. That makes it extremely difficult for families such as the family of Clodagh Hall, and I know there are very many other families, who are not given any answers in respect of how these tragic and terrible events occur. And in many respects, the way we deal with them in Ireland, and I suppose this is understandable, is we just regard them as tragic events and we move on and nobody really talks about it. In the United Kingdom, they've had a different way of dealing with these domestic homicides since the year 2004. Back then, they introduced a piece of legislation which provided for the establishment and the conduct of what's referred to as domestic homicide reviews. And what happens in the United Kingdom, and it commenced actually only in 2011, but what happens there is that in the aftermath of a tragic murder such as the ones I've referred to and the many other ones I haven't referred to, is that there is a multidisciplinary approach to trying to identify if any lessons can be learnt from the tragic events that took place. Interesting, the legislation in the UK specifically states that the objective is to try to identify what lessons can be learned from this. What happens in the UK is that the police, social services, in the UK obviously local authorities, because they have a much more extensive role than would be local authorities here, get involved in trying to produce a review and a report trying to identify how these events occurred. It's important to point out the function of these reports is not to attribute blame. Sometimes in Ireland we're desperate to attribute blame to individuals. The purpose of these reports is for the purpose of trying to find out if lessons can be learned and how we can try to detect these offences and prevent them from happening in the future. That's the purpose of the piece of legislation that I've drafted and that I'm seeking leave to introduce. And as I said to you, it's entitled the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill 2019. What it proposes to do is to put a new section, Section 40A, into the Domestic Violence Act that was enacted last year, and it would provide, in circumstances where the Minister or the Garda Commissioner believed that the death of a person was caused by the violence, abuse or neglect of another person to whom the deceased was related or with whom the deceased was in an intimate personal relationship or who shared the same household as the deceased could be ordered. I've also gone further so that it replicates what's permissible in the UK. In the UK, it doesn't just apply to tragic situations, as in the case of Clodagh Hall, where the suspect proceeds to kill themselves. It also applies in situations where there's any domestic homicide and if somebody is subsequently convicted, obviously the review would take place after the conviction. I've sought to do that here. I think it's important to point out nothing that these reviews will do can interfere with or in any way prejudice a criminal investigation. So if there is an ongoing criminal investigation, it will be imperative that that concludes first before any review is completed. As I say, it's not its function to attribute blame. It's about trying to get cooperation from entities such as the Probation Service or TUSA or the HSE, or it may be the case any government department. I think the government will need to assist me and my party in respect to the legislation. It will require the resources and involvement of the Department of Justice, but I think it is a good start, and I think we need to get onto the statute books domestic homicide reviews, and for that reason I seek leave to introduce the bill.
Thank you very much, Deputy O'Callaghan. Has the bill been opposed? It's not being opposed, so the motion for leave to introduce is agreed. Deputy O'Callaghan, would you like to move to the second stage?
I move,
Taking private members' time. Is that agreed? It's agreed. Therefore, we have concluded the business of the morning, and we can take a suss for 60 minutes.